here with us from the Parkland Institute from Alberta, Canada. Ricardo studies the challenges facing Canadian workers and the ways in which Canadian workers are fighting back and meeting those challenges in order to advance income equality and the rights of workers. Ricardo Acuna is the Executive Director of the Parkland Institute, which focuses on the economic, social, cultural, and political issues facing Albertans and Canadians using the perspective of political economy. He's based at the University of Alberta, and he is with the Parkland Institute, which is leading the way in examining power and wealth differentials. We are very, very lucky to have Ricardo here with us today. I'm so happy that he's here. I've gotten to know Ricardo Acuna over these past 5 years. I've been to Alberta to address the Parkland Institute a number of times. I've had the kind invitation of the Parkland Institute to share our Wisconsin story with our brothers and sisters in Alberta, Canada, as well as going there to see the people from the Alberta Federation of Labor. They are so interested in our fight and what's going on with us here in Wisconsin, and making sure that we can forge international solidarity to strengthen all workers on both sides of the border. I count Ricardo as a friend of mine and a friend of Wisconsin. And Ricardo has traveled all night long to be with us here in Wisconsin today. And any of you been to Alberta, Canada, to Edmonton? Maybe you went hunting there or something. But Edmonton, Alberta is a long, long way away, and there's not a lot of flights. So they ended up canceling one of his flights, and he traveled all night long so that he could make this appearance and speak with you here today. So please join me in giving a very, very warm Wisconsin welcome to Ricardo Acuna.
Yeah, I finally made it to Madison. My luggage is still somewhere between Chicago and here, so if you see me look at my phone and dash out of here, it's because my suitcase has arrived and I can change it actually. Feel like I'm addressing you properly. Sisters and brothers, it's a huge pleasure for me to be here with you today. International solidarity, working class solidarity across borders is about more than just supporting each other when we're feeling struggles, but it's also about lifting each other up and motivating each other. And one of the reasons that it's such a privilege for me to be here today with you is that you, the Wisconsin State AFL-CIO, has been such a huge source of inspiration and motivation and rallying for workers in Alberta. Your struggles, your strong sense of resistance and struggle, your ability to mobilize workers, your ability to organize and move campaigns forward has been an example that workers in Alberta have been passionately interested in and have been passionate about learning from and working to implement on the ground, which is one of the reasons we've had Stephanie come speak to us so many times, and one of the reasons that we've actually invited Stephanie to be a fellow of the Parkland Institute in Alberta to help bring those learnings and those experiences and that knowledge to Alberta to help us in our struggles. So thank you for the invitation. It really is a great treat to be here. What I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about what the Parkland Institute does and what it represents and how it is a manifestation of the struggles that we've been facing in Alberta, which in many cases are very similar to the struggles that you've been facing here. The Parkland Institute is a public policy think tank. We do research and education for the common good. That's kind of the official Reader's Digest version of who we are and what we do. And I'll get a little bit more into some of the specific things we do and how we do them and why we do them. But I want to do that by placing it in the context of Alberta's history. And the starting point for that history is 1993, in terms of how the Parkland Institute comes about. Before I do that, I hope you'll indulge me. We're an academic think tank, so I want to delve a little bit into theory here. Whenever I do these talks, and I do them a lot to labor organizations, to student groups, to community groups, I like to focus my talks around, oddly, the writings of Joe Overton, who was vice president with an ultra-right-wing think tank called the Mackinac Center, which is based in Michigan. Ultra-right-wing, one of the founding centers for right-to-work kind of theory. And Joe Overton posited a theory of how we move politics and how we move policies in the public realm. Since he's died, it's come to be called the theory of the Overton window of political possibilities. And what Overton said is that if you take all of the possibilities on any public policy at any point in time, all of them, and you lay them on a spectrum, whether you call that spectrum left-wing and right-wing, or socialist and capitalist, or individualist and collectivist, whatever you call it, at any point in time on that spectrum, there's a window. And that window is where public policy happens, because within that window are those ideas that are considered rational and logical and practical by a majority of the population at any point in time. As you move away from the window along the spectrum, you move to ideas that are considered unlikely, unplausible, and then the further away you get to the ones that are largely considered unthinkable. What Overton said was that you can actually move the window to encompass new sets of policy ideas, new sets of policy possibilities. And the way you move the window is by filling the public realm with ideas from the extreme. The theory being that the first time you hear one of these extreme ideas, you're going to think to yourself, that's just nuts. Nobody would ever implement that. That would never work. That's just crazy thinking. Second time you hear it, you'll probably think the same thing. By the time you've heard it 20, 30, 40 times a week, odds are you're going to start to think, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I should take a look at this a little closer. And when that shift in thinking happens, the window moves closer to that idea. This is what the Powell Manifesto here in the U.S. was talking about when it issued a rallying call to the media, to corporations, to university academics, to start making space for these ideas from the radical right across North America. We know what those ideas were, right? Low taxation, no deficits, no budgets, small government, no unions, no labor rights, no environmental protection. All of these ideas that we start seeing coming up in the 70s got privileged access throughout the 70s and 80s to media, to radio talk shows, to university campuses, to increasingly the courts, and the judiciary, and corporations, and chambers of commerce, and all of that. So these are the ideas that we started to hear over and over and over again. And over the course of the 70s and 80s across North America, that window moved significantly. So this is how we get to 1993 in Alberta. Alberta had come out of a fairly severe recession in the 1980s. Alberta's economy is premised almost entirely on oil production. And the price crashed in the 80s. And Albertans were quite traumatized by this. Incredible numbers of job losses, people walking away from mortgages, people walking away from cars, people just picking up and leaving, right? People were quite traumatized by this. And these folks on the right were able to leverage that trauma to make even more space for these ideas around low taxes, around responsible budgeting, around entitlements to public sector workers and how they're too entitled, and all of these things that we've been hearing for so long. They managed to use that to get even more leverage. So what happened by 1993 in Alberta is that the window had already moved significantly to the right. We've been hearing these. One party that was in power from 1972 until May 5th of 2015. In 1993, 3 provincial parties ran for election. 2 of those parties positioned themselves squarely within where that window was in 1993. And they ran on platforms of tax cuts, slash and burn budgeting, elimination of labor rights, public sector layoffs, and privatization. Both of these 2 out of 3 parties ran that agenda. In that 1993 election, combined, those 2 parties garnered 88% of the vote in Alberta. The third party, the New Democrat Party, or Progressive Left Party, hadn't actually clued in yet that the window had moved, and they ran on a fairly traditional center-left progressive agenda and got wiped out in that election. So the Conservative Party got re-elected, and as their leader was this guy by the name of Ralph Klein. So Ralph Klein takes power in 1993. And the interesting thing in all of this is that it was those 2 parties that filled the provincial legislature in Alberta after that election. Now, I always say, with all due respect to the state senator, politicians tend not to lead. Politicians tend not to be change makers. Follow that theory of the window. Politicians are going to try to position themselves within the parameters of that window because that's where they can get elected. I often describe it as politicians being these folks who are walking around looking for a parade that they can jump in front of. Right? Politicians move towards the window, they get elected. When they're in power, they have a very hard time implementing policy that falls outside of the window. There's no radicalness there. There's no room for radicalness in government. Right? So, 1993, Ralph Klein gets elected. What does he do? This may sound familiar to some of you. He rolls back public sector wages across the board by 5%. He takes 30,000 Albertans off the welfare rolls. Many of them get a one-way bus ticket to British Columbia, a neighboring province, as a way of getting them off the welfare rolls in Alberta. Privatizes everything in sight. Our provincial telephone company, our provincial energy company, our provincial oil company, all of our registry systems where people go to get their licenses and license plates and stuff. Privatizes almost everything in sight. Introduces funding for private schools, so that public funding, as of 1993, starts going towards public schools. And then eventually, through his terms, actually introduces a flat tax. So gets rid of progressive taxation and introduces a 10% across the board flat tax. Meaning the folks way up here at the top of the income scales get a huge, huge tax break. And the folks at the bottom of the income scale actually saw a small tax increase when this happened. These are the policies that we get coming at us in 1993. And there was no debate in the provincial legislature because both of the parties in the provincial legislature had run the same platform. And there was no debate in the media because this is the point where we see a massive shift to the right in the media in Alberta, when we start to get talk radio, the right-wing shock jocks, when we start to get these over-the-edge editorials about how taxation just shouldn't exist and there should be no public sector workers and there should be no unions or labor rights. So, a group of academics and activists and labor unionists come together in Alberta and say, we need to find a space where we can push a different vision. We need to find a space where we can fight to get a message across that can help start moving that window back in the other direction. And they looked at a variety of ways to do this, maybe create an advocacy organization, maybe create a body within the House of Labor that would do this work. And what they came to was the creation of the Parkland Institute and creating it within the University of Alberta for a number of reasons. One of the main ones being that as a part of the University of Alberta, all of our research on public policy has to be peer-reviewed and meet the academic standards of the university. So when we were putting our research out there, starting in 1996 when we were founded, when we were putting our research out there, they could disagree with the recommendations we were making, but they could not challenge the research and findings itself because it had the backing of one of Canada's foremost academic institutions behind it, and everything that implies. So that's the first thing, first reason why. The second reason was because of where the window was and the growing attitudes towards the House of Labour, it was becoming increasingly difficult for labour bodies to actually put their research out there, because every time they did, it would get immediately discounted by the media, by both parties in the legislature, and by many elements of the public at large as being biased and self-serving, right? This way, there was an arm's length body that was doing the research. And the labor unions and community groups and various advocacy organizations on various issues used that research to mount advocacy campaigns, to lobby government, to get out into communities, to hold town hall meetings around it, to mobilize people, to educate people around the issues. But the research itself was coming from a university-affiliated body, which gave it much more sway at that point in time. Our funding originally when we were born came primarily from labor. Within about 5 years, we had built up a supporter base of over 1,000 individual donors across the province of Alberta, a province of 4 million people. We had managed to secure funding from over 1,000 individual donors. So we were getting as much from individual donors every year as we were getting from the House of Labour, which was great. And it was great for our credibility because the media could no longer say at that point, these guys are just speaking on behalf of their funders. Well, yeah, we were speaking on behalf of our funders. Our funders were everyday working Albertans. That's who was funding us. And we were happy to say that throughout the whole time. So our main work is research on public policy. And despite the fact that we're part of the University of Alberta, I'm not talking about the kind of academic research that lifelong scholars write and publish in academic journals that only the other 15 people who are interested in that particular micro topic are ever going to read. We're not interested in doing that kind of academic research. We do our research in plain language, and the target audience for our research is the public at large. We don't lobby. We don't target the politicians with our research. We target the public at large. And what we try to do is echo that Overton-Winchell theory, to say, we're not going to make safe recommendations and safe proposals from inside the window. We're going to make our recommendation way over here, to make room, way over here, because that's your left, my right to your left. We're going to make policy recommendations from way over here to make room for the opposition politicians, for the labor bodies, for the community groups to fill that space in there. And when they come in, they can say, look, the Parkland Institute is proposing this, right? We're coming at you with a much more rational approach, proposing this. And trying to repeat that function that the right did so successfully across North America over the last 20 to 40 years of just repeating these messages and repeating these messages and repeating these messages. So that's our research. We do research on all aspects of public policy in Alberta. We also do this. I spend a lot of time talking to university students, to high school students, to community groups, to labor unions across the province about the work we're doing, about specific policy issues we're working on, about specific recommendations we're making, to try to get that information in people's hands. We learned long ago that we can't rely on the mainstream media to say, oh look, the Parkland Institute's got a new report. Let's, look into it or publish about it. They don't do that. It's up to us and to our partners in labor and to our partners in community groups to be the foot soldiers of that information and put it into people's hands to help inform how they mobilize and how they organize. That's our mandate. That's the kind of research we do. That's the kind of dissemination we do. Basically, more and more we're using social media and doing a lot of work on social media. I've got a social media expert now in my office. That's what he does. Tweets, Facebooks, our messages, our findings over and over. Every time a right-wing think tank says something, he's there pulling up information from our reports to respond to it on social media. So we're doing that kind of dissemination. We do programming. One of the main programming things we do is we hold a conference every November. that brings together progressives, academics, researchers, writers, scholars, labor activists, community activists from across the province to take what's happening in Alberta and put it in a big picture context and see what's happening, why it's happening, and start brainstorming ways forward from this. Stephanie's come to speak to our conference on 2 occasions now to bring your perspective to the work that we're trying to organize and do in Alberta, and it's great. And many times, we're often saying the same things to the same people, but you know what? That's okay, because the Parkland Institute Annual Conference has become a rallying point where those people can come together and feel heard and feel supported and know that during mid-company they can actually think big and push envelopes instead of having to think safe and hide the envelopes in their public discussions. So we're very excited about that. And then one of the most exciting programs that we've introduced in the last number of years at the Parkland Institute is a program called Next Up. Next Up Youth Leadership Program. And this is a program for emerging activists aged 18 to 32. Young people who are passionate about social, labor, and environmental justice. And we bring them together for 7 months. In Alberta, we have 2 programs, one in Edmonton, one in Calgary. It's funded largely by labor. And over those 7 months, we do 2 things. They get together 1 evening a week to talk about policy and issues. And the way we do that is we bring a frontline activist or practitioner from the field and comes in and tells their story of how they came to this work, how they do this work, why they care about this work, why this work matters, and then engages in conversation with the program participants. And then for 1 full Saturday a month, we do hard skills training. We bring in media people with cameras and microphones and teach them how to do interviews. We do mock radio call-in shows where we teach them how to deal with aggressive, loud, yelly, right-wing talk show hosts who are going to yell at them and talk them down. We teach them how to respond. We teach them how to get their points across. We teach them how to organize campaigns. We teach them how to fundraise for change. We do all of those things on those full-day Saturday sessions, and we bring progressive people from the community to teach and share those skills. We are now starting our 8th program in Edmonton and our 7th program in Calgary, graduating 13 to 15 people from each program in each city. And the people that have graduated are spread out all over the country, all over Canada. They're working in labor, they're working in non-profit organizations, they're working in activist groups, they're working in advocacy groups. They are doing research, they're organizing, they're mobilizing. It's having an impact. And beyond having that impact in bringing up a new generation of activists, the way we've structured the program facilitates intergenerational connection, because the people that come in are people who've been doing this work for 30 or 40 years, speaking to people who are just starting to do this work. And what it does is it builds cross-generational solidarity, which quite frankly, sisters and brothers, I don't know about your case here, but in Alberta, it's something we have been failing miserably at, in terms of building those connections between the upcoming cohort of activists and labor leaders and mobilizers and the existing cohort. There's a gap there, and we're working to bridge that. So, that's the work we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of work on tax policy. We've been doing a lot of work on healthcare. We've been doing a lot of work on seniors care and education, trying to keep it public, trying to grow what we have. Because we realized at one point in about 1999 that what we had been doing was defending a status quo. And when we took a look at that status quo we were defending, it was a status quo that was inadequate to start with. And decided it was time to stop defending an inadequate status quo and actually start pushing for a vision that reflected a more just society. So those are the issues we've been pushing on. That's what we've been doing. Around September, October of 2014, we started to see a shift in that window. We started to see an opening where all of a sudden Albertans were willing to talk about how backward our tax system was. And how ridiculous it was that one of the richest jurisdictions in North America was struggling to pay the bills, not because we didn't have a natural resource that everybody wanted, but because we had a tax system that was untenable. And all of a sudden, we're hearing these conversations around taxation, and more people wanted to talk about taxation and moving back to a progressive tax system. And it was that little opening of a window that helped us elect a progressive party in May 2015. Progressive Party came in, they adjusted the tax system a bit, they increased corporate taxes a bit. We're in a huge recession right now in Alberta because of this slump in oil prices. So we're struggling with debt, struggling with deficit. They haven't been able to provide all the funding they wanted, but they've done some very, very good things. They've announced a 3-stage process to get us to a $15 an hour minimum wage by September 1st, 2018. What we're doing now is not forgetting our mandate of pushing the envelope and pushing that window. So when the government announces that they're moving towards a $15 minimum wage, we say that's terrific. We applaud the $15 minimum wage and we support them by saying here's statistics that show that this works. But then we also say here's statistics that show that by September 1st, 2018, when we're going to hit $15, $15 will be nowhere near a living wage. So let's move beyond the $15 and here's how we can move towards an actual living wage. We push by saying, yes, we've got more progressive taxation now, but it's still not enough. The very wealthy are still largely getting a free ride on their public services and the very poor are still largely getting screwed. Let's move that further. Let's make sure our health care remains public. Any seniors' homes we offer, long-term care facilities, that they're public and properly funded. That's our work. We resisted the temptation after the May election to say, we won. We've succeeded. And now feel that our job is more important than ever, because now we're not just creating political room for an opposition party, now we're creating political room for a governing party. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to push the envelope. We continue to work with our friends in labor. We get together once a month with our friends in labor and the activist communities and develop common message boxes, identify priority issues to research and push on, identify events and speaking tours and organizing. We all support each other's work and making sure that we can continue to push this government forward to do these things. So that's what we've been doing in Alberta. That's how we're working to create a more worker-friendly, more progressive society. And I encourage any of you to come visit us anytime you want, particularly any November when we have our fall conference. I'll be around the rest of today and tomorrow if you have specific questions or want to talk about more details about our work. Thank you again.